So we left off last time just talking about the rise of Napoleon, and we mentioned that he was conquering Europe. This was his new focus, and we talked about all of these different territories that he had conquered. So at this point, we have Great Britain, Russia, Austria, and Sweden trying to turn against him, which leads us to the Battle of Austerlitz, which is with Austria, or the Holy Roman Empire. And at this point, Napoleon crushes his competition. So he defeats the Holy Roman Empire, and he forces everyone to sign a peace treaty. And most of this territory is going to be reorganized into the Confederation of the Rhine. And after the peace treaty, essentially his only enemy left is Great Britain. So now we get into the Battle of Trafalgar. Again, this is in 1805, and this is the only battle that was lost by Napoleon within Europe. So we had that defeat from way back when, but now we're looking at a European defeat. So it was the British Navy versus the French Navy, and the battle was taking place off the coast of Spain. What happened was the British Navy split and defeated the French fleet. This means that the British Navy is still going to be supreme, and it kind of means that Napoleon can't invade Great Britain anymore. So when we talk about the height of Napoleon's empire, we're looking at 1807 to 1812. These are the 5 years that Napoleon is on top. And he controls so much territory within Europe, but it's very large, which means it's very unstable. He doesn't have a lot of control because he's so remotely, he's only one person who's in this remote area of France trying to control so much territory within the rest of Europe. So at this point, by the end of 1812, really we have Portugal, Sweden, the Ottoman Empire, and Great Britain are the only countries not controlled by Napoleon. And once he took over a country, he would keep the rulers as his puppets. So they would be, still in charge, and they would still have a little bit of power, but they were really just following whatever Napoleon told them to do at this point. So this map is just showing you the great expansion of the French Empire, and we have all of these countries that are controlled by France and allies. There are very few countries left that aren't under Napoleon's power. So we're going to start looking at Napoleon's downfall, and one of his big issues is, we talked about how he was conceited and he has this big ego, so he's not going to take defeat very well. So in 1806, he sets up a continental system where any of the countries that are neutral and any of the French allies, he's going to tell them not to trade with Great Britain anymore. This blockade is preventing trade with other European nations. He's trying to make Europe self-sufficient. He wants to destroy Great Britain's economy. Unfortunately for him, no one really listened to him, so the French blockade is very weak. At this point, Britain is going to set up a counter blockade called the Orders in Council that was much stronger than the French blockade, and they would search and tax all ships that tried to pass. This leads to a minor 2-year war of 1812 with the United States. And it's essentially their blockade is stopping the U.S. from trade with France. So the U.S. and Great Britain get into this battle because they're not allowed to trade with France anymore, and the U.S. is pretty upset about this. In 1808, we get into the Peninsular War. So Napoleon sent his troops through Spain to get to Portugal. And when Spain protested, he removed the Spanish king from power and appointed his brother as the king of Spain. This leads to a 6-year battle between France and the Spanish guerrillas. These guerrillas are a small band of fighters using small arms and hit-and-run tactics. This war leads to 300,000 French casualties and proved the idea of nationalism. We've talked about this. This is the love of country. Your loyalty to your country is very strong. No one wanted to be ruled by Napoleon anymore. No one wanted Napoleon to take over their country. So the Continental System and the Peninsular War are two big factors that lead to the downfall of Napoleon. But the real big issue was the invasion of Russia. This is known as his biggest mistake. What happened was Russia was actually an ally of France, but Alexander I is refusing to halt trade under the Continental System. And Napoleon sends 400,000 French troops in to invade Russia. The Russians retreat further inland and they're using a scorched earth policy. So essentially, wherever they go, they're burning fields, they're killing livestock, and they're starving out the French. The French end up becoming defeated, and the Russians set Moscow on fire rather than have it taken by the French. So the French have no food, they have no way of getting any food, they're not used to the Russian climate. Napoleon ends up leaving Moscow shortly after and returning to France. And now we're in winter. The harsh winter in Russia really takes its toll on the French people. So Napoleon and his troops have to retreat home. About 10,000 people returned from the 400,000 that were originally sent to Russia. So at this point, everyone's turning on France. They're trying to take advantage of the weakness of France. And we get into a couple small battles. In 1813, the Battle of Leipzig, Napoleon sends in a very inexperienced, not well-trained replacement army after the issues with Russia. And they're very quickly defeated. Then in 1814, Prussia and Russia actually invade and attack Paris. Napoleon ends up surrendering at this point, and he's exiled to a small island off the coast of Italy called Elba. At this point, Louis XVIII, so we're going back to the Bourbon dynasty, this is Louis VI's brother, is going to take charge. Just a little side note, Louis XVII had died in prison with his parents after they had been guillotined, so that's why he'd not take over. So in 1815, Napoleon actually returns to France as emperor. The people completely accepted it. He escaped from Elba, and he has this last-ditch effort to reign and to regain glory. And this is going to be known as the 100 Days. He was defeated by the British in the Battle of Waterloo in June 1815. This is a battle that was fought in Belgium. It was Napoleon versus the Duke of Wellington, and these two are big, longtime enemies. The armies had mobilized against Napoleon when he came to power, and many of Wellington's men were not visible to the French army. So Wellington had Prussian troops with him on different battlefields, and Napoleon's troops were split. They used infantry squares against France and hid troops, and Great Britain could withstand massive, lengthy charges against them, whereas Napoleon's troops couldn't, and the Prussian troops gradually arrived to aid Great Britain against Napoleon, which leads to his next defeat. This time he is going to be exiled to St. Helena, which is a very remote island in the South Atlantic. He's going to be sent there all by himself, and he's going to die 6 years later due to cancer. And that's the end of Napoleon. So at this point, Europe, he's gone, and Europe kind of has to figure out what comes next. What are we going to do with all of this land that he took over? What are we going to do with all of the people that he appointed? So they're going to have to come up with something to lead them to a solution and to maybe not let this happen again. And that's what's going